Alrighty, whenever you're ready.
Welcome to the Prairie Farm Podcast. I'm Aaron Warbritton with the Hunting Public.
Perfect.
I like that.
Yeah.
It was out of our normal order, but that's
Yeah,
fine.
I like it. It's
We're
great.
gonna take that.
Blah, blah, blah. More music. Bing, bang, bong. Here we go.
I'm keeping all that in, brother.
No, you're not. No, you're not. Actually, yeah, you are. You never edit. All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. Aaron, you have traveled and hunted all over the United States. I used to tune in. I have 4 kids now, so I don't get to watch much YouTube anymore. That's not like Baby Bum or some little kid show. They're really into this.
Putting Coco Melon on for 12
Yes.
hours a day when it's his turn.
That's my babysitter, TV. But I used to watch every back pre all these kids, every episode, and I was just fascinated. So we're talking back in like 2020 probably. Fascinated with all the places you guys go. I still watch the show, by the way. I don't want it to sound like I stopped watching. But I've always been fascinated by all the places you guys go. And just the diversity of the landscape that you guys see. And I think what's been most impressive in that is, and we can get into this more later in the conversation, but how much success you guys find in those different environments. I've done not a ton of traveling and hunting, but definitely enough to know that what works in Iowa does not work in western Nebraska. You gotta figure out a new game plan. And so I've been very impressed at how you guys have had that success. But it also has struck me now, and what's interesting is I've had a real evolution as a hunter in that time from 2020 till now, to where I care. We'll never get away from the thrill of being on the hunt and the opportunity to fill a tag. But I get so much of my enjoyment from hunting in examining the ecosystem that I'm in. And I think that is a personal evolution that, I mean, if we're maturing as people, even as adults, really shouldn't stop happening for us. And I think I've definitely, as I even observe, a lot of your guys' footage from this last fall, you guys have changed in that way too. I can just tell, I work around, Nicholas and I, what is this going to be, Nicholas, episode 260, something around there.
Something like that.
We've talked to a lot of people through the years who care about ecosystems, who care about specific species, or a little tiny bit of minutia about a specific ecosystem. And we've talked to a lot of hunters, and most people get there, I think. And so as you've gone through that journey in all these places, all over the country for all these years, I imagine you've probably started to pick up on some changes and some stark differences, both good and bad, or maybe remains to be seen yet. But could you maybe talk about some of those observations you've had through all these years of doing what you do with the hunting public?
Oh yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Whenever we go to any location and hunt, that's been the biggest change in the last 7 or 8 years. Before, we mostly hunt public land. If y'all aren't familiar with the show, before we basically concentrated solely on hunting pressure, whether we're hunting turkeys, deer, ducks, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like, where are the people going, and where do we have to go to escape them? That was basically that was basically what the entire strategy evolved around. But that has transformed, and definitely in the last decade, year by year. And now we consider, if not more so than the hunting pressure aspect, the habitat involved for whatever species that we're looking at. And that's not so I mean, that's just sort of a general take on things. Every situation is different as we travel across the country. Hunting these animals is extremely situational because, as you said, Iowa is different than western Nebraska, and that's different from, the mountains of Colorado, and that's different from the Appalachians out east, and that's different from the plains of South Dakota, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of these situations is slightly different, and that doesn't just go state to state. That's literally county to county, and in certain portions of a given county, you may have different sort of habitat diversity or species within an ecosystem than you do 20 miles away.
Yeah.
There's just such a broad array of stuff there that we could get into, but mainly, yes, we focus a lot on habitat. And I mean, I'm in the middle of turkey season right now. I'm always thinking about habitat. I was just out west and in prime Miriam's turkey habitat and found a couple spots where there was a ton of birds. And then we also went through just miles and miles and miles of turkeyless country that looked like it should have turkeys. But the more we examined it, we realized, like, what's the limiting factor here as far as the habitat goes? No water.
Yeah.
So they've got everything else that they need, basically, but don't have a permanent water source. They may have an intermittent water source, but as you know, in order for these animals to survive, they live 365, not just during hunting season when we're out there.
Yeah.
They need this stuff all year.
Yep.
If there's not a permanent water source there, then why is there going to be turkeys there?
Yeah.
And there was miles and miles without a permanent water source. So, yeah, we're constantly thinking about that everywhere we go.
Do you have was there a place that you used to go to often? Could be turkeys, could be deer, that because of some change you don't really consider going there anymore? Or is there a place that you previously had written off that there's been a positive change? You're like, yeah, man, we need to be there.
There's a few places that we've written off where there's been a positive change, either in the habitat practices that they do, the amount of disturbance that they put on the landscape. They've introduced prescribed fire, where they didn't used to have it. And it wasn't that those places weren't good before. They had animals on them. But now that they're doing, especially with turkeys, now that they're doing consistent disturbance to the landscape, whether it be TSI or, prescribed fire, like I mentioned, both those things just seem to, I don't know if it helps production or if it brings in turkeys from, other areas to that spot. I think it does both, but I'm not an expert on that. I just hunt them. I just can tell you where they are and where they aren't during hunting season, and then at other times of the year. And we've definitely had spots like that we had written off in the past, and then revisited once we realized that they're doing some cutting in here, and they've went in and they've got 2 fresh clear cuts in here. They're not big ones; they're small ones where they went in and removed some timber, and then they did a 40-acre burn here and a 28-acre burn on this side. They've also daylighted these 2 main logging roads that run through the middle of it, and they've sort of extended that buffer out past the edge of the road, 15, 20 yards on either side, and now they have a bunch of native plants and forbs coming up in the edge of that road bed where it used to just be, closed canopy forest right up to the edge of the road.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you're seeing more turkeys out there. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
Man, I love that example because it's so quick. You know what I mean? We're talking, how long have you been? Did you guys start in 2018? Is that when? 2017.
But I worked for Bill Winkie at Midwest Whitetail well before that.
Right. Yep.
And he's always doing land management stuff on his property.
Yep.
Where he was managing for deer primarily. So, yeah.
Yeah. We've gotten to enjoy the We haven't interviewed Bill yet. Maybe we should just reach out to Bill sometime. But we have enjoyed the family tree of Midwest whitetail so much here on this podcast. I mean, we're good friends with Justin and Drake and Josh and even Steve Hansen's kind of tied in there a little bit. I think
used to be a part. I mean, I don't know what it is about Bill. But
Skip.
He attracts some awesome dudes.
Yeah.
We really enjoyed connecting with him.
Oh yeah, know all those guys and worked with a lot of them. You know, back in the Midwest whitetail days. I mean, I hired Drake Lamb as an intern the year before I left. So
that's pretty cool.
He's a good friend.
Yeah, Drake's an awesome guy. One of the coolest people you can meet, really. There's just, you know how you like describe people, like if you were to do like a word association game or something, for Drake, it would just be cool. Drake is just cool. You know what I mean? He's just like fun to be around, and he's super nice.
Dude,
but
the other day,
great hunter too.
He's like around everywhere. Drake is. I was at a random graduation party, and I am very confident the people there don't know him, but I end up sitting next to this guy who turns out to be like custom high-end jewelry maker. I think he does quite a bit for the hunting industry. And I asked, I was like, who have you made stuff for? And he's like, yeah, I usually sign NDAs. I can't really say. But he was like, I don't know how it came about, but we both knew Drake Lamb, of course. Everybody always knows Drake Lamb.
I think it was Drake's grill that he probably made, wasn't it? Didn't Drake get like a platinum grill with some diamonds in it or something?
In his teeth.
That's why he's cool,
so
man.
Love you, Drake.
So, yeah, we love you, Drake. So, anyways, I'm getting myself distracted here. But in a short amount of time, you've seen some of these major changes that have taken, and I mean, let's be honest, THP is that's been your full-time job for quite some time now. And so you're able to put in a lot of research to where it is you're going to hunt. And the fact that it's caused you to change. No, previously we had a red X through this place, to now it's a green check mark because a little bit of work has been done there. And in that short amount of time, the response of the ecosystem to having that treatment has been so big that it's changed your travel plans. I think that's kind of a subtly significant thing to consider there.
Oh yeah, I mean, it happens all the time whether we're hunting on public or private land. I mean, we hunt on some private land and with guys that manage 365 basically, and they see a tremendous difference year after year. So, I mean, we're involved in the management side of it a ton. But here's the catch with public versus private. As you know, in order to disturb the landscape and to do a lot of these management practices, you need to access the property. And sometimes you need to access the property with bigger equipment. Sometimes you don't. I mean, to do prescribed burn is fairly simple.
Right.
But what we've noticed is as some of these properties increase the management on them, it creates better habitat, but it also makes the property more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So as you make the properties more accessible, public properties where you don't manage the pressure like you do on a private piece of land, hunting land, you basically make more birds, or you bring in more birds, but you also make them easier to hunt because people can walk roadways, they can walk fire breaks. There's a cut now across this timber that makes it easier to get across than it used to be, whatever. But that's what we see is if you take a big chunk of just closed canopy forest with very little habitat diversity in it, but there's no access whatsoever, there's way fewer animals on that piece, but it's also much harder for people to get in there.
Right.
So the few animals that you do find, you may be, they may not be dealing with hunting pressure as much as the other spots. I would rather have the area that, has better habitat quality because ultimately that builds more animals over time.
Right.
That's the catch-22 is a place like that may have a pile of turkeys, for example, but they're going to encounter so much hunting pressure in the first few days that in the middle of turkey season, they may be moved off that property.
Yeah.
And they'll come right back because all the habitat is there once the pressure subsides, and year after year, there's more and more turkeys there, even though the place is getting pounded with hunters. That's the other thing I've noticed is on public lands that get an insane amount of pressure, those places can be in danger of, over harvesting the resource, depending on the management practices that they implement. I've seen some areas that get absolutely pounded with hunters year after year, but every year, if you go back to them, they have a stable population of deer and turkeys, or more.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen instances where turkey hunting, where places just got pounded. I mean, I'm talking dozens and dozens of trucks first week hunting turkeys. And you would think, and there's gunshots going off everywhere, you'd think there ain't going to be a turkey left on this place. And you go back there the next year and they're gobbling everywhere.
Yeah.
And that place is heavily managed. There's a ton of work going on. There's a ton of money going into it. There's a ton of people involved in the management of that property. And I guess that's my take on it, is that you're essentially making more birds because of the work that you're doing. And even though a large percentage of them are getting, or not a large percentage, a high number of them are getting harvested, you've created a turkey factory, and it can withstand it. But if you don't have that and you have high hunting pressure and poor habitat quality, that's the areas where you are running into problems, especially with turkeys, because they're getting harvested consistently year after year, but they have to live in poor habitat quality, and over time that hurts their production. Among other things, I mean, it's a situational deal. When you get to talking about turkey declines or stuff like that, it could be a number of different factors, but the most consistent one that we see across the board is quality habitat usually means more turkeys.
Whoops, had a little cut out there, guys. Sorry. I think you got everything you said though, Aaron, because it records a native recording on your end, so I think we're all good there. All right, Kent, you will have to edit right here. I'll find that in the transcript. It's actually pretty easy to do. I'm thankful for the rain, even if it interrupts my internet signal.
Yeah.
All right, here.
Real happy with the rain.
Here we go.
I'm curious.
Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah. I'm curious. So if there was more access to hunting and way more pressure, but everything was managed well, with the amount of hunters now, it seems like you're saying, hey, that would still be better. But if there's more access to better managed property and hunting starts to get easier, you get more people doing it, right? You take away barriers, you get more people doing it. Do you ever get to a point where you spiral where now it's not the turkeys or the whitetail, it's the tags, and managing that resource? I'm just curious the relationship between habitat, the resource quantity, the ease of access, and the amount of people going there. Like, there's kind of a four-way relationship that seems very intricate, and then you've got people at the DNR doing their best to try and make decisions based off of that. Have you seen that? Like, how do we do about that? Like, are we good at making those decisions, or do you feel like
no,
we're bad at it?
Yeah.
No. And to be quite honest, it's not the state's fault. A lot of people want to blame their local state DNR or agency or whatever. The reality is they have to manage these species on a statewide level. Mm-hmm. And like we just talked about earlier, these ecosystems are different, county to county, across the state in a lot of instances. So the state has levers they can pull, which is limits and tag draws and things like that, to try to, keep a sustainable resource across the state for long periods of time. And that's what they're going to do, because that's all they can do. But I guess that's the catch is you could take public property A over here in this county that's got tremendous habitat that has, sort of challenging access, and that property will consistently have more turkeys on it than public property B on the other side of the county that has tremendous access and poor habitat quality. It's because, and that's the thing, the limit is the same. You can kill one turkey per person or whatever it is on either one of those properties. The difference is that the one property has got everything and way more turkeys, so essentially way more of the resource. The other property has way less, just based on the management.
So, you're talking about a multiple of 10 in terms of manpower you would need to, instead of go state by state, to go county by county and be making.
Well, maybe not even county by county, but region by region. One thing I do notice if we go down the state rabbit hole here a little bit, one thing I do notice is the states that have more money have more manpower, and they perform more management, and consequently, a lot of times they have more public land or they have more access.
But you're just unrelated money, just New York, California, Florida kind of.
No, it's. I'll use Missouri as an example because Missouri's had the state sales tax for conservation for, 40 years maybe.
Wow.
It's like 0.08% of every purchase made in the state. That sales tax goes to the conservation department.
We were just talking about this, like a separate tax for.
It's a tiny amount, but over all purchases,
really adds up.
It adds up. And I used to complain about Missouri Department of Conservation when I was a kid because I was, living in the country, and we got our deer season set up where we got rifle season in the rut and all this. Me and my buddies used to sit around and complain about it all the time. But now that I've got the perspective of traveling across the country and hunting all these different states and seeing how a lot of these different places operate, I realize a 5,000 acre piece of public land in Missouri may have 4 or 5 full-time employees working on it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whereas if you go to a neighboring state or another state that doesn't have the funding that Missouri does, they may have one or half of an employee, a part-time employee, working on that amount of acreage. Yeah. And as you guys know, it takes manpower to do this.
Oh, yeah.
Something I find very ironic is that we put Teddy Roosevelt on Mount Rushmore. Like, literally on Mount Rushmore, not metaphorically. He's literally on Mount Rushmore. He said, the most important thing is our conservation and natural resources. And we were like, yeah, but we don't like that part of his presidency. Like, we're not following that at all, even though we say he's one of the great presidents we've ever had. And then he's like, hey, this is what's important. We're like, nah.
Yeah.
And what I'm getting at is, if we actually say, oh, that is important, then 0.08% on, my new laptop shouldn't be that big of a deal. You know what I mean? And so,
to be fair, too, there's going to be a lot of criticism from the side of hunters, too, where it's like, well, I don't agree with how they spend that money, or they're wasteful with some of it. And I think that's true as well. Mm-hmm. That's why if you feel that way, you need to be involved in your state process and going to your committee meetings and stuff and understanding where that money is going, because they have to catalog it all. Like, that's their job. So you can see, if you do enough digging, where that money does go. And if it's not going to a place that you support, then you can go and, voice your opinion in a respectful manner, obviously.
How often have you seen that be an issue?
Every state, there's a lot of people that complain about their agency and how they spend their money.
I'll give you an example. So I was on an elk hunt this last fall in Colorado. And there was I took a picture of it. I'd send it to you later, Aaron. There at the trailhead, there was a state game agency brand new truck from the so I'm in Iowa. This was farther away than Iowa, where this truck was from. And that guy was in there all week. He was he was hunting elk out of his taxpayer funded truck. And Who knows? Maybe even hauled an elk home in his taxpayer-funded truck. And so that, to me, would be an example of wasted money that people would have a hard time. And what it does is it destroys trust.
He's getting knowledge.
Breaking it in. Just wanted to see if we could have elk back here, and
Yeah.
I won't name the state, but it destroys trust is what it does, because the vast majority, and really I feel here in Iowa, talk about doing a lot with a little, very little public land. We know that, especially from a law enforcement side, the conservation officers are stretched very thin in this state. There are some public areas that do have a decent staff of, I guess you'd say, like habitat management folks working on them. But that, I would say, is more the exception than the norm. I think there's elements within our state, like especially our trout program, which gets quite a bit of attention, and there are a lot of people that work on behalf of that. But there's a lot of public land that, man, I bet hasn't seen a state employee in years that have been able to get to that spot.
Well, there's just so much of it. How could they get to all of it?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. It's just they're so understaffed, and but yet we still have the really premium deer hunting here that can be enjoyed on public land. I think that's a false connotation that people have with public land, that there's no good opportunities. I think Aaron and his crew have done a great job demonstrating how there is great hunting to be had on public land, and the same is true for turkeys. And it's getting better for pheasants. I think the problem that we have with our pheasant population is much more to do with rather recent ag practices that changed along with the ethanol demands. But I think we, there's examples of misuse, and they do a outsized amount of damage to the public trust when you see those. And so, like Aaron said, if you got an axe to grind, then call up. Don't just complain about it to everyone else, because that just sows more discord and no solution comes out of it. Instead, reach out and contact, and be like, hey, this is what's going on. I don't like it. Could I get an explanation, please? Maybe I will like it once you explain it to me. But this is what I'm thinking, and that's the only way we get better.
I would also encourage people to talk to whoever their regional biologist is, or whoever their regional manager is, because I know a lot of the habitat managers that work for the state, especially in Iowa. Mm-hmm. And I probably know 6 or 7 of them, and literally every one of them is super knowledgeable, super nice guys that work their butts off.
Yep.
And they know about how this works, and what they have to work with and what they don't. I think it'd be smart to get to know those people if you were
absolutely
in your area, because it isn't on them. They're out there trying their best with what they have to work with. Exactly that's one thing I caution people about whenever they blame the state or whatever, and they see a state worker. They're not all created equal. The guy that's driving the company truck to go out west elk hunting, that's not the entire department. They're people just like you and I. I mean, you go from one to the next, and it could be completely different in how they operate. But yes, it's important for you to learn from them about what's going on in those specific areas, and then form an educated opinion, and then go in a respectful manner and talk to the commission in your state. That's more productive than getting online and getting on whatever Facebook post that you see and griping about it. That's not going to do anything but, like you said, sow more distrust And then the further it gets down the line, the more mad everybody gets, and the less everybody knows essentially about what is going on. But I mean, I know there's wasteful spending in Missouri, like I said, but there's so much money that comes in from that sales tax every year that I can look at a public property that's managed here in Missouri, and I can put it up against areas from all over the country that are managed by agencies that have way less resources. And 9 times out of 10, the property in Missouri is going to have more wildlife on it and better habitat than those other areas.
Yeah.
And I think that's a byproduct of that sales tax, basically.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great point. Absolutely.
Can we talk about public land for a sec? I got a question.
Yeah.
I'm just here to get us canceled.
Yeah, I guess so, man. You're really kicking the hornet's nest there with talking about public land right now.
So Kent and I were just reading something that was passed by the subcommittee, right, in Washington about, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, about in Nevada.
Oh, yeah.
And okay, so because I'm out of the world a little. I mean, I use public land. I was on public land yesterday. I don't hunt hardly ever, and so I don't use it for that resource. I'm not as connected in that way. I'm not following it like you guys are. I'm not saying this isn't a bad thing. I don't understand it. How is federal land going to state land a bad thing? Can someone explain that to me? Or county? You know what I mean? Because we've got county parks here, out in Iowa, and they're not only for people in our county. They don't check our ID or anything like that. So could someone explain? Or is it, obviously, I think we all agree that selling like a national park so that it can be mined by some private company, I don't like that. That's terrible. But specifically the part of it going from federal land to state land. Could someone help me with that?
It depends on what type of state land. So, and it depends on who's going to manage it within the state. So, if state land is acquired as state trust land, then it becomes much more difficult. And it's like, I was just out west hunting Merriam's turkeys. There are some states where you cannot hunt on state trust land. It is used for investment purposes and other means, and you are not allowed to hunt on it. And there are thousands and thousands of acres of it. And then if you go right next door and there's just a state of property, that is managed essentially by their conservation or DNR department for recreation and hunting, then you can obviously go on it. That's the difference, though. Some states you can hunt on the state trust lands, but that's like if you took the state of Montana, for example. If you find a state of Montana property that's managed by their department for recreation and hunting, that's perfect. That's great. We're all in on that. But then if you go and you find a piece of state trust land, they may allow hunting in some states, but that's not their number one, motivator. That's not their number one reason for holding that asset.
What is it usually just resource extraction, or what are they?
It could be any number of things. They could hold that asset through time and sell it so that they could, they use it as an investment property, and that means
just on their books.
Yep. They could do a number of things, like you said. I mean, if it's business related, they could introduce that to it. It's much. I mean, Randy Newberg's got a much more, I would say, articulate and better explanation to state trust land than I do. But that's my basic understanding of it is state trust land can be a bad thing for the person that's wanting to recreate or hunt because that's not their priority on those lands.
I think an example of what you're talking about, Aaron, is I want to say it's called Belf land in Nebraska, where it's that it comes out of that deal where land was given to states at statehood, and it was somehow tied to their state board of education. It was like it was basically a here's a dairy cow. If you milk it every morning, you'll have a resource to sell, and you can either hang on to it or you can sell it. And a lot of the states, especially Iowa, sold almost all of theirs, and I imagine Nebraska did too, because they're ranked. I think they're tied with us for least amount of, or for second to least amount of public acres or something like that.
Yep.
But they still have some publicly owned land now. I believe it's called Belf ground. And when you look on it on like like Onyx, well, it stands for like Board of Education Lease, fund or something like that.
I think they named it Bell first and then figured out. It's terrible.
Well, when you're looking on Onyx, you're like, whoa, look at all this blue public land. Yep. But you're not allowed to access that without the permission of the private operator who's leasing it for grazing.
That's right.
And so it's money that taxpayers technically have rights to, but it's land they have rights to. However, they don't because of the Belf legislation that's there, unless they get that, just like you were trying to get on private land, essentially. And so that would be an example. But also, you look at it from this standpoint. Right now, Nicholas, Utah and Nevada would like to sell a good chunk of their public land, or they would like to gain control of it. Rather, they would like it to pass from federal ownership to state ownership. How much stake does Nicholas Lirio have in federal land in Utah and Nevada right now? Not zero.
Not very much, but not
zero.
More than I would if it was state land.
Right, because you don't live there. You're never going to go there. Probably, it's not. It's unless you have some.
I went to Tahoe once. Lake Tahoe was pretty cool.
I won't go there. I was going to say something about door knocking and conversions and things like that. But, you would have zero stake at that point, right? Now you're right. You can still, if you want to go to county conservation land in Wisconsin and hunt, you can, or Utah or Nevada or wherever. However, you have no control over what the final outcome is for that land. You don't have any voting power once it's pulled to state level. Plus, the other side of it is funding. Like Aaron just did a nice job laying out how much better managed, well-funded acres are, public acres are. There's so much better management practice. Now, if you take away the federal bank account that goes behind managing those acres, and don't get me wrong, it's not all rainbows and butterflies on federal land. There's a lot of problems there. Back in, what was it, Aaron, 2019, 2020, when the Great American Outdoors Act was passed, that was supposed to create a funding source that would help deal with a lot of those problems, because those problems existed and they still exist to this day. However, there's a lot bigger bank account behind managing them from a federal standpoint than there is just from a state standpoint. And then finally, the last thing is, it's a lot easier for those states to get rid of them. Utah doesn't want it's public. It doesn't want those federal acres turned over to their ownership because they think they're going to do such a better job of managing them. They want them so they can sell them. It's way easier for them, and then they can make money off of it. So that's the whole argument for. I mean, we've been trained to think that in all cases, bigger government or more centralized power is always bad, and that's just not true. A lot of times it's true, but it's just not always true. And I think public land is one of the examples of when it's not always true. And so if it can stay in federal hands, then all American citizens have a stake in what goes on and what is the final determination for those acres. And so I would encourage anyone who's tuning into this who values public land to be loud about not allowing that to be transferred to state ownership.
Yeah, we're all about public access and wildlife habitat. And basically, if that land is sold and then developed, then it is no longer wildlife habitat, and it's no longer public access. So
100%.
we're not for that. However, the big thing with this particular bill was it was kind of snuck in at the last minute. It wasn't really. Yep. It was just as almost an add-on to the existing bill.
Yep.
So people really didn't have a say. It was politicians slipping it in there in the last minute and trying to get it passed so that they could just keep on moving. And that's a precedent that we definitely don't want to see set. If in a fair fight we lose it, that's so be it. If a bunch of Americans decide that it isn't in their best interest to keep it, and we think it is, then that's how democracy works.
Exactly. Yep.
But in this case, that's not what happened. And we don't want to see that happen.
Opposite. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much the
opposite. It was the opposite.
They knew that the Democratic Republic would be outraged by it, so they said, "How can we get this past the Democratic Republic? We want to make sure that they don't know about it." So they literally pushed it through at like 11 something p.m. at night.
Yep.
Because they wanted to get around the voter. It's the most un-American thing you could possibly do, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a hot button issue right now. There's a lot of people fired up about it. And like I said, it's hard enough in a lot of these places. I mean, you guys mentioned Iowa. It's one of the lowest states. It might be the lowest or one of the lowest in percentage of public access. So we don't want to lose more of it. I mean, even if it's in a state like Nevada that I rarely go to, I don't want to see anybody lose it, basically to try to make more money or to try to get us out of our deficit, which we definitely need to get out of. But I always look at land a little differently than I do anything else, whether it's businesses or commodities or whatever.
Yeah.
Land is a finite thing. Like, you cannot make more of it.
Yeah.
I can go outside with a camera and I can make more YouTube videos right now after this podcast is over.
Right.
We can go out and we can plant corn and we can grow more of it this next year. We cannot make more land. In fact, we're actually losing more to development and those types of things. Like the walls are closing in slowly on our wildlife and have been for 200 years. And it's happening more and more and more through time. So that's the way I feel about land personally, is in regards to wildlife and access, is like, we cannot afford to budge an inch on this because we're getting squeezed from all directions already with these animals and have been for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very well said. Very well said. Nicholas, I need you to do some math for me.
Okay.
So I looked up. We have 640 million acres of land that is federally owned or managed is the wording. So we'll just assume it's all owned. Let's say we sold all of that land for the very generous going price of $10,000 an acre.
That is so generous.
Pretty generous.
Let's say 5,000.
All right, we'll say 5,000. We'll say $5,000 an acre. And let's just find out what that total is.
It's 3.2 trillion, I think.
3.2
thousand million billion trillion.
Yeah. So now let's think about this. What's being told here, and Aaron was alluding to this, is that, look, we're going to sell this land, and it's going to help us pay down our debt, of our $36 trillion debt. So let's say we sold every last acre. We still aren't even sniffing the bottom, you know what I mean, the end of that debt line.
And don't get me wrong, I don't think using our natural resources is a good plan for our debt, but we should clarify something. From what I have heard, more of the talk of revenue or balancing the budget comes from leasing it. Leasing it, not
well,
just
but
like...
this has been specifically tied to this issue. Has been said, yeah, look, we got to pay off the federal debt. That argument has been touted by those individuals who have pushed to sell these acres in this recent event that we're talking about.
I don't disagree with you on that. I would say the people that I know that seem a little more intelligent on the talking of like not just like people spouting out what they heard. I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about like people who are like, oh, we need to sell that land so that we can, I'm like, I don't think you read about this at all. But the big thing is leasing it, but not just like grazing, like BLM, right? They do that all the time. I think they even lease to like harvest natives off of them.
Yeah, but they're already able to do that.
Yeah. No, so what I'm saying is not that. They're talking about leasing to like mine, leasing to
right. But there's already a lot of that's done as well.
Yeah, and so they're talking about unlocking more of that. Is kind of the idea, is because then you get like income every year. And I don't think that's
well,
the way
yeah,
to
but
do
that's a separate issue. This issue that we're talking about right here is they're literally trying to sell off. Believe it's 460,000 acres of federally owned land.
Oh, to states that can pay for it,
or whoever.
Yeah,
right,
which
right.
is
and
again,
the argument,
a terrible plan.
The argument for that has been, look, this money that's going to come into the federal government is going to be used to pay down debt. And so my whole point is you could sell every last acre of federal land and still not even come close to paying off the federal debt.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of it, come away, like Aaron said, come away with nothing to show for it in the long run. Because what do you have left to sell now? You sold all your assets.
Well,
money's paper, essentially. The land is finite. There's only so much of it.
Let me get on my soapbox here, because I think there's like a deeper human thing that we don't want to address. We are like people our age, younger. We don't know what it's like to run out of money, because for the most part, when we run out of money, we can get a credit card, we can get our car on a loan, we can go to the bank and they'll loan us tons and tons of stuff.
We can declare bankruptcy like Michael Scott.
I declare bankruptcy. It's really easy. I've done it 8 times. But they keep calling me. I don't understand. No, but so
I just hit block.
These things, and so on the national level, we say, I want my national parks and I want my pristine water, and I also want everything else that the government pays for to give us. And that's just not how it works. That can be how it works for a while, and then you end up like Greece, in a financial destitute place where their 401ks went to nothing. These people work their whole lives, and so I don't want that. Now, here's not the answer. I'm worried people are going to hear me say like, yeah, why don't we sell? No, that is a bad thing. If you are making money at your house, like you're making decent money, and you are still negative on your budget, I'm going to tell you to stop spending that much money. I'm not going to tell you to sell your house. I'm not going to tell you to sell your car or your kids, or you know what I mean? 'Cause that's what we're doing.
That's a good example.
That's what we're doing, and so we just need to figure out. We need to spend less. Yeah. So anyway, I'm off my soapbox, but I definitely don't think selling land is the way to go. Terrible way to go.
Yeah, and to be fair, it is our debt is a existential threat to our country to have so much debt, and so I'm not trying to minimize the fact that it's a serious problem.
Yeah, it's tough because it gets put against conservation, but then I'm like, what? No, conservation's an existential threat as well. We can't sacrifice one to save the other just because one is sexier.
In my opinion, it's like using a leaf blower for a prairie burn. I mean, why would you fight the fire with fuel?
Yeah.
That
sounded charged. That sounded like you've seen some stuff.
Well, it's just leaf blowers and burn helmets, Nick. I just don't get it.
All right. We've got to get to the Habitat Association. We got to make sure we cover that, because Aaron is working on a super, super, super cool project. And actually, Justin Carnes was the one who let me know about it. Justin, thank you. Appreciate you. But I don't need to do any explaining. Aaron, what the heck is the Habitat Association?
It's a 501c3 organization that we started sort of collaboratively between me, Kyle Leibarger, the Native Habitat Project, Matt and Adam at Land and Legacy. Ryan Kirby is involved as well, and then several of us from THP. We've all sort of pitched in to get this thing going. Basically, to make a long story short, personally, within THP, a few years ago, we started donating money to turkey research because we were seeing wild turkey declines in a lot of different places that we hunt, and there was a lack of research. So we started donating money towards that research and really started to get to know the scientific community that researches turkeys. And just like any scientific community, there's a lot of disagreement between the scientists, about what's happening here and there and how to interpret this data and whatever. But the one thing that was very consistent across the board was habitat. It's like every one of them agreed on that. And as more researches came out, it's evident that across much of the wild turkeys range, they lack quality brood rearing habitat. And Kent, you mentioned the farming practices with pheasants a while ago. As farming gets more and more efficient and gets tighter and tighter and essentially cleaner and cleaner, cutting up against fence rows and not leaving buffer strips and things like that, we see diminished wildlife habitat on the landscape. The same thing is happening at a big scale with turkeys, in these different ecosystems. And it's pretty obvious at this point, and that's when we got to talking with all these habitat guys about it, it's like, well, we just have all this anecdotal experience hunting public land and then funding this turkey research. And then they brought in sort of the full picture to us when we got to talking about habitat and ecosystems, especially, Matt and Adam and Kyle, because that's what they deal with all the time is habitat.
Right.
And the light bulb started going off immediately. It's like, guys, well, why don't we start putting money into why don't we just put habitat on the ground? How do we do that? Well, let's create a 501c3 called the Habitat Association where we don't focus on a specific game bird or
I love that.
deer or elk. We want to work with all of them. We want to collaborate with as many different groups as we can to put habitat on the ground, because Kyle said it best when we started. He said, honestly, when I'm looking at these properties and they're lacking quality native habitat, I might be able to rally some people around saving the habitat for an endangered salamander on that place. Yeah. And he said, none of those people are hunters. They're environmentalist type folks. He said, but the reality is the salamander needs the same habitat that the quail needs, that the turkey needs, and so on and so forth. It's like a lot of these species rely on these native plants that we no longer have. So it's almost this trickle-down effect that we saw. Is like, man, if we can work collaboratively with a lot of these other groups and we can just put quality native habitat on the ground somewhere, anywhere, everywhere, then it's sort of going to benefit everybody involved. And so that was the direction that we went with the Habitat Association. And like I prefaced before we started this conversation, we've decided to go about this slow at first. We target specific projects. We fund specific projects. None of the money goes to anything else but that project. And then we show, everybody that where that money is going. And through time, we show the progress of those projects. So we had that pollinator project that was one of the ones we started out with. I think it was like $5,000 to fund the seed and, the labor and everything to put that pollinator planting in. But, as you guys know this better than anybody, there's multiple steps to this. You don't just buy the seed and you're like, hey, pat myself on the back. It's far from that. There's all kinds of site prep involved. There's burning, then there's obviously planting, and then there's maintaining it for years to come, sometimes multiple years before you truly see what you have. So we're like, well, let's show people and build our credibility that way. It's like, this is what this money is going to now over, the foreseeable future, we're going to show you step by step what happens, and how the property changes aesthetically and how the species within that ecosystem start to use that property. And that's sort of the goal with the Habitat Association, is we're not just trying to raise as much money as we can so that we can build this big 501c3 organization. We want to raise money for these very specific projects at first so that we can build our credibility through time. And as time goes on, we believe those projects will get bigger and bigger, and more people will get interested. But that was our biggest sort of criticism of some agent or some orgs going into it, is that they've gotten so big that they take on so much money. Where does it all go? And then when you become a member of that organization, are they yeah, how removed are you? And how transparent are they with where the money is? It's like I'm putting in my $100 every year, but I don't see anything going on in my county. I don't see anything going on in my region. That it's like, where is that money coming back to me on the ground? That's why we went this route with it. And it's been really good so far. Everything has been trucking along just how we'd hoped. It's a slow process. So with our communication platforms, if we really wanted to pour gas on this thing, we could get more and more people involved and build sort of our funding base. The problem with that is that, well, if we have so much money that comes in, where are we going to put it? We want to make sure we have legitimate projects. We don't want to just be, whenever a project comes along, like, we all vet it. It goes through the whole board, especially Matt and Adam and Kyle. Like, they look at it and then they talk to the regional, people on the ground, the managers of that property that are going to be doing a lot of the work. And then they come up with a full-blown plan for that money and what this looks like in year 1, year 2, year 3, so on and so forth. And how are we going to measure success within that project? We funded that burn trailer that was, I think, $13,000 for it went to a prescribed burn association in Missouri.
Love that. That's awesome.
And
that's a big deal.
Yeah, all you have to do to use that burn trailer is become a member of the PBA. It's like $50 a year. And you got to go to one meeting or something like that. It's not a lot. Like, if you want to use that burn trailer on your property, you got to become a member of that PBA, get educated on prescribed fire, and then you can schedule out time to use the trailer. So, and the state agencies can use the trailer. So it can go on both public or private lands. And we figured, our ROI on that investment could potentially be pretty high. We pay $13,000 for this trailer, and how many acres does it improve every single year?
Yeah.
Ultimately, if that ends up being tens of thousands of acres in 5 to 10 years, then that's a tremendous return on investment. I don't expect it to be that high, but you get what I'm saying is you put this thing in place, you put the tools in place with the correct people, and then over a long period of time, it can be used by essentially everybody to create better habitat in whatever sort of situation they're in.
Yeah. I think
so we're looking for more projects like that, and we have funding there, but that's the main reason why we haven't sort of really blown this thing up yet, is we don't want to, we don't want to run before we crawl. We've got to learn to do this, and we've got to move slowly. And at some point, we may need to hire somebody to run this thing. But then you get into the weeds of having administrative costs and stuff like that people don't like. I mean, we're talking about the criticisms of state agencies a while ago. Well, if you have $100,000 of taxpayer money that goes into that agency for conservation, how much of that's going to administrative expenses?
Yeah.
That was something, was it Charity Water? They were pretty vocal about. They said, all the money you give goes directly to this stuff. We go to separate donors to get administrative stuff paid for. Kind of interesting. But the What I think is, well, I should say what is interesting to me is that the scope of it's really just unlimited. And what you were talking about earlier with the species overlapping and Kyle talking about them overlapping is that's what we found. If you've got, we tell the story a bunch. We've got a friend in a town nearby who put in 500 square foot of pollinator, and he had a buck just hanging out because there's 500.
Yeah, he was tended a doe, Aaron.
There was just no life anywhere
in this prairie patch that he put in his backyard in an urban yard.
Yep.
And so I think that the wildlife's so desperate for life on the ground, for habitat, and there were a bunch of species that quote unquote whitetail don't like in there, But the fact that it was like either that or chemical filled grass or cornfields, there's just nothing else. So I was really excited. Justin called me. He was so excited. I didn't really understand what he was talking about. It took like a 20-minute conversation with you to figure out like what actually was going on. But we were even talking about like if you could work with counties to do roadsides, but then you got to convince farmers not to mow those roadsides, But I do think so. So a question I have while you were bringing it up is, it does take, with prairie specifically, I'm sure you guys will do all sorts of habitat, but prairie specifically, you're talking about 2.5-ish years to get a really solid stand established. But then, I mean, you need to come back every, I don't know, you could stretch it every 5 years and burn or do some sort of management or make sure there's Queen Anne's lace isn't taken over, those kinds of things. What is that just going in with the math of how much money it's going to take, and then you guys put a 30-year timeline of like, okay, we need to set this much money aside to do something on that property every 4 years for 30 years? Or how are you doing the future maintenance on this stuff?
That's essentially created in the original plan.
Okay.
Whenever we think of and create the scope of the project with that manager that's there, that's what we're looking at. Exactly to your point is, no, we don't just want to buy the seed and then sow it in the ground and pat ourselves in the back and say we just created a pollinator project. That's not what this is about. It's about showing the progress through time and what that eventually is going to look like, and then how to maintain that, which, as you say, costs money over time.
Yeah.
And people would rather, once they understand that, most folks would rather see their money going towards that than they would other things like your administrative expenses. However, here's the thing. In order for us to really grow this thing really big someday, we're going to have administrative expenses at some point. Yeah. So we're trying to figure out how to navigate that. But that's that's why we're doing all the work ourselves right now, is because we really don't want to go there. We want everybody's funds, and that's the way it's set up right now. Everybody's funds that come in go directly to these projects. But our line of thinking was we'll have a general membership fund at some point, but we're always going to offer these specific projects. So if you don't want to just donate a blanket amount to THA, you can look at the projects we have available and say, oh, this one trips my trigger. I only want to put money into this. So then your funds are earmarked to only go there.
Wow.
You can actually go to that specific page, and ideally that's sort of our vision for it is once we have enough dedicated managers on the ground in these different places, like we've already been talking to Justin about this a good bit in Iowa. It's like, how do we build a project in Iowa, so that people on the ground in Iowa can donate to it and see it come to fruition, because that's ultimately going to mean more to them when it's there in their backyard or close by. It's going to mean way more than if they put in money and it goes to something in Virginia.
Right.
If they're in Iowa, for example. Some people don't care. Some people are just all in with the cause, and that's kind of how I am. I just want to see across the landscape. I want to see more native ecosystems. I mean, that's my vision for it. But I totally understand where people are coming from, and ultimately that's the goal, is to have these projects in these different states that are managed at the local level through time
Right.
that we can show the progress of.
Yeah.
Do you what goes into the criteria for? I imagine, before you start really hammering on it and getting tons of money coming in, you're pretty picky about what the project
Yep.
you're picking, and then as you're hammering, even if you do get a lot of money, you're probably gonna have projects submitted more than dollars to fund them. So how do you qualify the projects you want to invest money in?
That's kind of already happening since we've launched it. Is we've had a lot of ideas come in, and we appreciate them all. But like I said, it's got to be vetted by the board, which I am one of. But I kind of defer to the other guys. I mean, I ask a lot of questions about it. Don't get me wrong, but I defer to the habitat experts that are on the board with me most of the time. I mean, that I certainly get my vote, but I'm very interested to hear what they have to say when it comes to these projects, because that's where you see some wasteful spending happening within the states. Is they may have $10,000 that goes to habitat. 8,500 of that may go to great projects and to great stuff, but then here's 1,500 for mowing roadsides. Like you said, it's like, how is that benefiting?
Yeah.
And then if people hear about that, then like we talked about earlier, that puts a bad taste in their mouth, and then you don't build your credibility that way. You start to the distrust starts to come in, and we are desperately trying to stay away from any of that. So whenever we value, I'm trying to land the plane here for you, Nicholas. whenever we look at a project, that's what we're thinking of. Is okay. How is this going to work in this particular ecosystem? Is it going to be beneficial? Is it a limiting factor that they have there? And most importantly, can we get a return on that investment? Meaning, we don't want to sink a bunch of money into something that is not going to be maintained after 2 or 3 years. Like if we go in and we do a big timber stand improvement project that's 50 acres or whatever, that's all well and good for the first year or two. But if nothing happens beyond that, then it just grows up with invasives, and you've got an even bigger mess than you had to start with. So we're very careful when we're picking these things, especially with the managers on the ground there, because it's like, well, are you a volunteer there? Are you an employee there with a local agency? Does your vision for this match ours? Because that's really important. We do not. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen, how these things can go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
You can get everybody fired up right out of the gate, and then go in there. But if you don't have a legitimate plan downstream, then you're not going to keep it that way, and in fact can make it worse. Yep, exactly. So we've had some big ideas come in that sound awesome, but how are we going to manage it?
Yeah.
That's sort of been the Achilles heel with some of them, is we just don't see a future past 2 or 3 years on how we're going to be able to do this. If we do and we feel pretty confident about it, then it's something that we'll pull the trigger on. But that's why we're starting relatively small, and that's why we really like the burn trailer idea. Like I said, that one is pretty simple and clean, that you can show return on investment over time.
I love that idea. I really do. Pheasants Forever has done a lot of work with that.
We did it collaboratively with them and Quail and NWTF. That's another thing. Like all of the specific game organizations.
Yeah.
We're all. I mean, that we funded the burn trailer through NWTF. Like I worked directly with their people to get that thing going, and then we funded it.
That's so. I think that is such a great idea, because it reaches down to the individual level. I mean, the very foundational level of all this, because an individual can go and use that trailer to get the work done on their property, and there's education that goes with that, which I think is another thing that. I mean, this is while I have a chance to give a suggestion here. I think education could even be an element for you guys. Like if you use some of the funding that comes in to set up a Saturday workshop. Hey, when you burn, this is how you do it. This is a back burn. These are the things you need to look out for. These, here's a couple of scenarios we're going to go over on the screen here. If you have a busy roadway over here, you really need to be mindful of your smoke. That's a risk that people don't think about. They just think about what they're burning down. They don't think about where their smoke's going. Or do you have, high winds and you're up against your deadline for when you got to burn? Maybe you can mow the whole thing off before you burn it. Little things like that takes out the anxiety and gets people to do it and do a good job of doing it. Or, burning at the right time for different management goals.
Education's definitely very high on the priority
going down
list.
to the individual level. I think is
come up
going
with a
to
plan
be
on
the
education?
biggest thing that can
Not
come
yet.
out of this.
We're working through it right now. Our expertise is obviously in content, so we can help create a lot of that.
Yeah.
But we're trying to decide. It always comes down to ROI, especially with this. It does with any business, as you know, but especially with a 501c3 nonprofit, because a lot of them kind of get away from that and they say, well, we're raising money and we're doing this and we're patting ourselves on our back the whole time. It's like,
Trust us, we're putting it to good use.
Right. Trust us. Yeah. No, we need to see ROI. So with that said, is it more advantageous for us to make an entire library of educational content through the Habitat Association and we help build it? Is it more advantageous for us to do that, or is it better for us to take some resources and fund an educational podcast or an educational channel that is already producing that, and then we can partner with them? So one thing that Turkeys for Tomorrow did this a couple years ago with the Wild Turkey Science podcast, where they partnered with them and they gave them resources to produce their podcast. And they had to mention Turkeys for Tomorrow and what Turkeys for Tomorrow was doing and their mission and everything. But really the reason why they funded the podcast was to get more communication out there about turkey research. So if you look at that, I don't know what their initial investment was on it, but let's just say it was $10,000. I don't know. If you put $10,000 into that and then 120 episodes later, you have, I don't know, let's say 1 million downloads, there's your ROI. Yeah. So you put $10,000 into this to essentially communicate that education to the masses, and you had this many people listen to it. And you could go levels deeper than that too if you wanted to. You could go just off of email correspondence, like how many people have corresponded to us that said that, this podcast helped better their understanding of wild turkey science, whatever. I mean, you could attach whatever metrics you want to into it, but essentially that's what we're trying to do is measure it. Dude, so we can see what the success looks like. And that's what we're weighing right now is, because once we kind of go down that path, it's a lot of work. We can build out that whole library, and we can do it in a matter of months probably to have a lot of that good educational content. But is that better served on the Habitat Association's YouTube channel, or is that better to live on the Hunting Public's YouTube channel that has a much bigger following and with a lot of hunters that are interested in this stuff? Right. So it's trying to weigh those two things. Yes, we're concerned with our brand's credibility, but is that how we want to build that brand? Is through content, or do we want to use other collaborators to do it? Yeah. So that's what we're weighing right now, just being transparent with everybody.
Do you guys have a website or anything for people to find it? And Kent, do we have a hard cutoff here in a minute?
No, we don't have a hard one.
Cool. Nope. I didn't know with Riverside. I'm not as familiar with the.
No. I just put an estimated time on there.
Okay, cool. Do you have a website or anything that, like, if people are looking to find out more?
Yep, thehabitatassociation.com. And we've got, YouTube channel and social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook. There's not a ton of stuff on there right now. There is some. So if you kind of want to see what our vision is for these specific projects, there's a couple of them on there, including the burn trailer and the pollinator project, that you can see. You can sort of see what that looks like on the website. And we've got cost breakdowns on there, like where that money goes, and then we've got updates on our social on, what happens after the fact. And I'm waiting on report from the PBA right now with the burn trailer to see where we're at on that late spring currently.
That's so cool. So like for every project, will people be able to kind of track its progress?
Oh yeah.
Man, that's so cool.
That's the idea.
Cool. Hey, whose idea was this? Was this your idea?
No, this was mine, and like I said, Matt and Adam and Kyle and Ryan, they're all involved. So it was not just one guy or one group of people. It was sort of a collaborative effort. Ultimately it was Matt and Adam who said, we've been thinking about starting a 501c3, but what do you guys think? And then we kind of chipped in our thoughts, and Kyle did the same. And Kyle was like, as soon as he heard about it, he's like, dude, he's like, we need to do something like this bad. He said, I have so many people that want to get involved in something that are followers of mine. And, Kyle is tremendous on the education side of things. If you follow him on TikTok, he's constantly putting out that educational content.
Oh yeah.
And it's cool how many people care about it.
Oh yeah.
He's hilarious, but they love
he has a huge following too of people that aren't hunters.
Right.
That's sort of one of the other reasons why the marriage came together, if you will. We have a huge following of people that are hunters. But here's the common ground is once you realize as a hunter and sort of as a sportsman and a land manager, once you realize what the animals that you love to chase need to survive, and then you talk to an environmentalist who's a non-hunter over here on the other side of the aisle, if you will, it's like, you want the same plants as I want.
Yeah.
You want the same ecosystems that I want. And, my dollars from my licenses should go to protecting and creating more of those ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we're trying to sort of marry the two together is we just care about habitat. Mm-hmm. We want to put habitat on the ground. That's it. I mean, in the pollinator planting, habitat is on a piece of property that you can't hunt. Now, you can hunt property nearby, but it's actually in the corner of an area that's protected.
Mm-hmm.
We don't care. I mean, the more native habitat we have on the ground, the better off our wildlife are going to be. And the better off our wildlife are, the more hunting opportunities we're going to have.
Right. Yeah. You think back to, pre-settlement, and everything was habitat, right? And if you didn't want to hunt, well, there was still, I just can't imagine that being the case, but there was still plenty to enjoy within a healthy ecosystem. And if you did want to hunt, you couldn't imagine a more wildlife rich existence than at that time. And so, really all we have to do is look backwards to look forwards on a lot of this for the evidence that it works. And I'm really excited that you guys are doing it. And I like how hunting is a part of it, but it's not the it kind of is, but it's not the full carrot, I guess, is maybe what I'm saying.
No, it's just one aspect of it.
Right. And I think that's a pure way of doing it. That being said, I do think that just as we're seeing right now with talking with Aaron, that a lot of the best conservationists out there are hunters. A lot of the most, by best, I mean most impactful. And I think you can look through history and see that as well with guys like Aldo Leopold and Ding Darling and
Lacey.
I don't know if Lacey hunted or not.
I know. I was just thinking that
Teddy Roosevelt definitely was a hunter. A lot of these great conservationists that we've seen do have interests or ties to hunting. It's Ding Darling, I believe, who came up with the first duck stamp. Those are impactful motivations when you go out there and you participate in the ecosystem as a hunter. And so I think it's great to see that. I think also something that, and I know we're probably going to end this one here pretty quick, but I think an important conversation we have in all of this is talking about the hunting side of conservation. I think I would also, before we're too quick to pat our backs, all of us hunters, we need to be looking at our own personal evolution that we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation, and it's not just enough to buy a hunting license and call yourself a conservationist. Aaron, you probably remember 5-6 years ago, this phrase, you don't hear it near as much anymore, and I'm glad for that, honestly. But the phrase was, hunting is conservation. And it is a part of it, right? It's factored into a state games management plan that X number of deer are going to be harvested by hunters every year, and that's going to keep our population at some level where we can have some kind of predicted outcome for that population of that species, and maybe the immediate species they're most closely affecting. But really, we all can do more, right? If all we're ever doing is just extracting an animal out of the ecosystem, and if we own land and we're making habitat decisions just based on the fact that I want to extract more of those animals, then I think we're really missing a huge opportunity to do a whole lot of good. That if we really love that animal, we should be doing bigger things. Our friend Thomas Milsna, I think, has done one of the best jobs of talking about this with his holistic land management work that he does. And our good friend Doug Duran also has talked at length about this, and I think something like what you guys are doing here with THA does something that I like to refer to as elevating an ecosystem. Elevates the whole ecosystem. It doesn't just focus on the deer. It doesn't just make it so that you have a better hunting opportunity or better luck when you go out hunting, right? It's something that makes you see more northern flickers when you're sitting in your stand in October. It makes it so that native bee populations can start thriving again. It makes it so that eastern meadowlarks will be nesting on your property again in the spring, and on down the list, right? That all these other very valuable components of a healthy ecosystem benefit when we, as hunters, take the biggest opportunity that we have to make the biggest difference, and we run with it. I just think it's an impact that very few other groups of people and even groups of conservationists, it's an opportunity that very few of them get to have to that level that we do.
I agree. I don't see any disadvantage, whether you're a hunter or not, in learning more about habitat in the ecosystems that these animals live in. Yeah. It's like then you really get to understand how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
Like
yep.
It's so many light bulbs start to go off. It'll make you a better hunter too.
Absolutely.
So if you are about that life and that's what you're trying to do is take and shoot stuff, it's going to make you a better hunter. But what's ultimately going to happen indirectly is you're going to really start appreciating all those small details that you just talked about. Mm-hmm. And then I think then you're on the path towards becoming a real steward of that land, mm-hmm. Especially for future generations. That's where I get really fired up about it, is like, how are we going to protect this for the next generation and the generation after that? Because like we said earlier, the walls are closing in. Yep. I think that's the move, and that's why we started it.
Yeah. And there's some very measurable targets that we can kind of keep in our mind. I think that's one of the coolest things. Like, I really hope my great grandkids get to put in, and I'm sure it'll be a limited draw, but can put in for a Iowa black bear tag someday. I think that would be a beautiful thing.
Iowa black bear or an Iowa elk. Your great grandkids drawing a tag. Which would you pick?
Well, I guess I would say elk because that would mean that way bigger changes happened than what we need for black bears. We would have some huge scale positive change there, but much more realistically as a black bear.
Yeah, that'd be pretty wild. Could you imagine what that would be? That would be nuts. I think about that all the time, like going back, way back to the bison,
Yeah.
It's like, holy cow. Those things were habitat disturbing machines
Yes.
that just roamed across the entire country,
Yep.
And then they're all gone, and everything just sort of cascades down from there, and it started with us, and it's got to end with us at some point.
Man, that's beautifully said.
You've got to understand the history of how we've got here, and then how we get out of it or how we improve it.
Yeah. It starts with us and it ends with us. Man, we can't end any better than that. We wanted to ask you for a good hunting story, Aaron, but I think that just means we got to have you come back on the podcast sometime, and we'll get one out of you. But Nick,
I got a lot of them. I don't know if there's any good ones or not, but I got a lot.
There's plenty of good ones. I've watched a lot of them. In fact, I used to be a biology teacher, Aaron, and I used to one of the cool opportunities I had was at the end of the day, I would get to teach a 30-minute class on any topic I wanted. And of course I chose how to hunt. And I used a lot of your guys' footage in that class when I'd illustrate different points. And the one that I remember the most was a Iowa turkey hunt that you did where you saw this bird on the other side of this, almost like this bay or a little cove off of a lake, and you called and then you moved, I think, if I remember right. Yeah, I think you actually had to get in your vehicle and drive around to the other side of this cove, and you called that bird and harvested him at it must have been 5 yards or something, real close. And kids loved that one. So
yeah,
I've seen a lot of your good hunting stories, but I bet I haven't heard all of them. But Nicholas, you got to ask your favorite question.
Man, I feel so lame when you set it up like that. I feel like a robot.
All right, well, say it in a different accent then.
Okay. All right. If you could have never met Kent, would you feel like your life was better or worse? No.
Don't answer.
No. So normally we ask, if you could snap your fingers and change one thing about the world, what would you change?
Oh man. Holy crap. That's a big that's how much time do you have? That's another podcast, Nicholas.
30 seconds.
75% sales tax, all of it going to conservation.
In every country, everywhere.
Man. The one thing that, since we're on the topic of habitat and conservation, and I just mentioned the bison, that would probably be it. It's wow. I think about that all the time, everywhere I go. And I know that I have a lot of relatives that farm, and, farming is a huge part of my family. So I'm not trying to knock it in any way. But it's man, what happened after we decimated the bison off the landscape?
Yeah.
And learning about them and what they do, when they laid down in herds out there in those prairies, they would leave little patches of area where it would kill the vegetation underneath. So they would have, fresh regrowth coming behind them. And that just created this pile of diversity across the entire landscape. You had early succession getting reset in all these different areas naturally by those big grazing herds. And they were all over the U.S. They weren't just in the plains. There was woodland bison, and like you said, there was these big species. There was bears, elk, all that stuff. Those natural grazers, if you will. And when we axed them from the ecosystem on a broad scale, that set us on a trajectory forward. Look at the hoof shape of a bison. Mm-hmm. It's like a cultivator almost. Yeah. So when it hits the ground, it digs into the ground a little bit. So you have all this plant response coming behind those giant herds. What do you think follows? Like all of those upland game bird species, turkeys, everything.
Yep.
Pollinator plants, forbs, all kinds of stuff. And that was across the landscape. And we lost that. And now we've been trying to find ways to sort of piece it back together. And that's kind of what we're doing now with a lot of these modern habitat practices that we do. But nature used to do this on its own.
Yeah.
Like through fire and through our native bison herds and on down, like to the elk and to the bears and everything else that you mentioned. So yeah, I guess that would, if in a snap of my fingers, it would be cool to have that at least somewhere. I know we can't do it at a broad scale now because there's way more humans on the planet now than there was then. And we just kind of throw a wrench in things naturally. So, but it would be neat to see that somewhere, sort of that full scale, start to finish native landscape, how it was.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Native Americans, thought of them as a spiritual animal almost.
Yeah.
Like they knew the full picture that came from them.
Yeah. Bison. So, of course, every living thing equates to life in some regard, but some just outweigh it. I think bison and beavers.
Yeah.
Those two things, they represent so much life. Keystone species is what they are. And yeah, that's very well said.
I don't know if that was the good answer that you were looking
No,
for or not, Nicholas, but
answer.
that's just what came up to the top of my head.
I'm just searching to feel something once again. Man, Aaron, if people were like, man, this dude, he's got such great things to say. I mean, your following's pretty big. They've probably heard of you. But where can they find you if they haven't?
I'm usually at the hunting public, whether that's YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or our website. I'm on there, but you can also find me at the Habitat Association as well. Me or Matt or Adam are usually answering that email all the time, and we're putting more and more eggs into that basket as time goes on. Like I said, my full-time job is making hunting videos and hunting content or, custom content for other companies and that sort of thing. But I'm moonlighting, working, trying to build the Habitat Association as well. That's the project one of the projects I'm most passionate about at the moment.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
And we're glad you are. It's making a difference.
Man, well, for everyone listening, just as Aaron is doing, man, you're doing it. I mean, truly doing it. Conservation happens one mind at a time.
Perfect.